Here's an introduction to what human sex trafficking is.
I remember pulling up to the nightclub, and I remember looking over at a car with these two guys sitting there. Initially, they had us do wet t-shirt contest, and they had us do some mud wrestling.
And that was my first customer. So it was my 19th birthday, and that was, the beginning of a new life.
We do have prostitution, and yes, we have a legal framework here in Holland. In my idea, this system is not perfect, but maybe you could tell me another country in the world where they have a better system.
There's an atmosphere of predation in the brothels.
If you are now entering a brothel, you can see some amazing things like alarm knots on the wall.
I think an equivalent is to say, we found child labor sweatshops, and the answer to it is to put a fan in the room.
If we in the United States had gone down that path with slavery, we would never have gotten rid of the institution.
People say, well, prostitution is just like McDonald's. A woman has to go to work in a place that she doesn't like and where she gets all sorts of guff. Well, I say to that, at least in McDonald's, you're not the meat.
I can't state this enough. It is everybody's kid. It's everyone's daughter. It's not just the runaway anymore.
Her clothes had changed. Her hair and nails were being maintained. She wasn't coming home. She was 18 now. I couldn't make her come home anymore.
They're coming at our youth from every direction.
In total, over a 12-year span, I spent $300,000 on porn and hookers.
Demand drives the market. It's the revenue stream for human trafficking.
To be bought and sold is horrible.
I really like that video. It's a great introduction. So my name is Mrs. Cathy Peters, and I am a retired inner city high school teacher where I taught in the North Delta area near the King George Highway, Kitty Stroll, where children still sell their bodies for sex 40 years later. I was a volunteer for two former members of Parliament, John Weston in West Vancouver and Joyce Smith from Manitoba, and she was the MP who introduced all three laws on human trafficking in Canada. And I'm a mom of three amazing grown children, a son and two daughters, and my husband is an architect and says I have to do this advocacy because I can. I've worked on this issue for 30 years, ever since I heard a presentation on Cambodian child sex tourism. But in the past 7 years, I've been alerting and raising awareness with the public, with the police, and politicians in British Columbia. All 190 city councils, 87 provincial MLAs, 41 federal MPs, the 91 Canadian senators, every premier and attorney general in Canada, the Prime Minister, the Public Safety Minister, and the Federal Justice Minister, and I'm in touch with every member of Parliament in Canada. That's 338. I've been a witness at two federal justice roundtables, one in 2017 and one in 2018, and I've made over 200 presentations now to over 10,000 people of this rapidly growing crime that is aggressively targeting our youth and children due to the ease, no surprise, of social media, technology, and globalization. Human trafficking and sexual exploitation is the fastest growing crime in the world. Canada, and it's here in Richmond. Child sex trafficking is the new pandemic. And while egregious, it is clandestine because the luring and buying of sex is occurring, no surprise, mainly online. So my mission statement, and here's my bumper sticker, and every MP and every MLA has received it from me in BC, a modern equal society does not buy and sell women and children, and nobody disagrees with that. My goal is to traffic-proof every community in BC and make sure there's not another Robert Pickton. Has anybody heard of Robert Pickton in this room? You know, when I present to high school students, they've never heard of Robert Pickton. So that's a problem. So what do I mean by traffic proof? It means that you understand what human trafficking looks like, and you just saw a video that kind of described it, and then you know what to do about it and who to report to. My strategy is really simple, the 2 E's. We need education of the law and the problem to all segments of society, and we need enforcement of the federal law. The result? I want BC to be known as a really bad place for buyers of sex, traffickers, facilitators, and for the business of sexual exploitation. So we have a federal law called, and just so you don't all fall asleep, I'm going to get you to repeat it after me. It's called, I'll say it once, the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act. Now say it with me. The Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act. Let's do it one more time. The Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act. I really like the name of that law because it targets and criminalizes the buyer of sex, the trafficker, the facilitator. It recognizes that the seller is a victim, they are not charged, and it offers the seller exit strategies to get out. So BC right now is the best place to traffic human beings in all of Canada and out of all of the United States because the police are not being mandated, funded, or trained to enforce this law. BC has a few human sex trafficking convictions, but it is Reza Mazami from North Vancouver, where I'm from, who was first charged a couple of years ago involving at least 20 girls. 9 of them were underage, 4 of girls were from the North Shore. He received the longest sentence in jail, 23 years. The VPD is now beginning to target the demand for sex, Johns or buyers of sex, if you're following the news about their John stings. Our law focuses specifically on addressing the root cause of exploitation, which is the John, the sex buyer, who has the demand for paid sex. BC's very behind all other provinces in recognizing and addressing this crime. Hence, buyers of sex, traffickers, and organized crime act with impunity in BC. And it's lucrative. It's a lucrative crime. $280,000 to $360,000 per victim per year. And traffickers will have a stable of 4 or more girls. Do the math. Note, drugs and weapons are sold once, but girls are sold over and over and over again. These girls and women will service, are you ready for this? It's shocking. 10 to 60 men a night. 7 days a week until they end up mentally ill, commit suicide, on drugs, murdered, and then disposed on Robert Pickton's farm. The shelf life for these girls is 2 to 7 years max. It's important to connect the dots on this crime. You might see drug use, missing person, mental illness, a runaway, suicide, but ask why. Our daughter, who's a family doctor in the States, told me that all mental illness that she's seen involves unaddressed, underage, sexual trauma, abuse, and assault. So Vancouver's an entry point into Canada, and along with Victoria and Nanaimo is a port city, making this area a hot spot for prostitution and human sex trafficking, and now child sex trafficking. So we need to seriously step up and address this crime because at this time there really is no deterrent in BC. So I've got a lot of handouts here. I've really done it. I've got tables full of handouts, and I've put subject matter with each of the handouts so you know what you're getting. For example, the back table is parenting. I have a whole section on pornography. Child sex trafficking, you've got to have these handouts up here. And I put out a whole bunch of kind of interesting posters as well. The federal law, if you want to know what that is over here. And the really scary one, and I want everybody to look at it, is a German brothel menu. That's what I don't want in Canada. But we have a sex industry pushing to fully decriminalize prostitution. If we have that, read the brothel menu. That's what we'll have. And we'll have more of those than Starbucks. So that's what I'm trying to stop. The whole key here is I want to keep children safe. The really good news is that Canada now has a brand new National Human Trafficking Hotline number. And I've got postcards at the back and posters with that contact information. They can help anybody, anywhere in Canada. So know the resources, they know what's available, what resources, and they also keep the stats and data, and will even assist victims report to the police. Locally, we have something called Children of the Street Society. And they're in the schools, and they speak to children grade 3 to grade 12. They reached 27,000 students last year. They do great work. Another organization is OCTIP, that's the Office to Combat Trafficking in Persons in Vancouver. They have a 24/7 victim helpline, and I have a couple of posters. If anybody wants to take a poster, you can help yourself. It's called Victim Link. That's the number you call if you know a victim and you want help. So what's human trafficking? It's a recruiting, transporting, transferring, receiving, holding, concealing, harboring, or exercising control over a person for the purpose of exploiting them. The key word is exploitation. It's modern-day slavery. So I work with an emergency room doctor and also with a forensic nurse specialist, and they are now seeing human sex trafficking on many of their shifts. These health practitioners are very concerned that first responders, police, and you, the community at large, are not recognizing the red flags of human sex trafficking. She said to me, look for the red flags, and once identified, call 911 in order to approach these vulnerable victims of trauma and then to know how to offer them help. These girls, women, and some boys are terrified. They've been conditioned to be afraid of authorities. They will not come out and say, oh, I'm being sexually exploited and pimped out. So it's the job of the public, us, and police to look out for these victims if they identify one or two or more red flags. My favorite handout actually is the yellow one over there. It's got all the indicators of what to look for. I've included that handout of human trafficking indicators, but I want to add a few more things to the list that can also identify a lot of victims. If they're in an ethnic minority group, and we've got a lot of immigrants moving to Canada, they are very vulnerable either to traffic or to be trafficked. If they're labeled a prostitute, if they're addicted to drugs, if there's mental health problems. Victims will deny being exploited or abused until you assure them that you're going to help them and offer them safety, help, rehab, safe housing, etc. The key is empathy. Imagine it was your daughter, your sister, your mother, your niece, or the girl next door. The key here is that they need to know you can help them and you have something specific to offer them, that there's hope. And that's the good news. There's always hope. And that you can help them out and you now know who to call. So let's see what human trafficking looks like in Canada with the boyfriend scenario. So this is Amy's story.
I'm Amy. I did really well in school. I had a lot of friends, but I really hated the way I looked. I started dating Ryan. He just seemed really interested in me. He gave me a lot of attention. He loved me. He just made me feel really good about myself. We talked a lot about what we wanted and the future. I was in love with him. After 2 months, he started telling me he had money problems. He told me his friend's girlfriend was opening a massage parlor and I should go and work there.
Sex trafficking is when someone is forced to sell sex against their will. This is happening right under our noses. It could be happening to a girl just like a girl you know. They are lured in public places, schools, malls, and online.
All our victims to date have come from Toronto or somewhere else in Canada.
The girls that I work with are 16 to 24. I do get calls about girls as young as 12 and 13 years old. They can be an ace student at school, but still not have self-confidence. So that is a common thread with all the girls that I work with.
He told me it would only be for a little while. You know, we would make all this money and buy a house. I was working 12 hours a day. I was in so much pain from having sex.
The way that they lure the girls is to romance them, compliment them that they're pretty, to buy them nice things, to shower them with attention.
Girls, they fall in love with these guys. These guys become their boyfriends at first.
I had this total breakdown, and I was crying, and I told him, I don't know if I could do this, letting these guys be all over me. He was like, you better figure out how to deal with it, because I'm not going to be with a girl who isn't giving me money.
Typically, one girl could make a pimp about $250,000 a year. And that's just one girl. It's very lucrative. It's as lucrative or even more lucrative than selling firearms or drugs.
And I'm hearing conversations like, if we killed her, like we can just bury her somewhere up north and no one will ever find her. I was just so scared. And the thought going through my head is that he really could have killed me.
The trafficker imposes lots of rules on the girls, so they're not allowed to eat or sleep without his permission. They're not allowed to go out on their own. Even if they are, he is watching their every move, and they know not to go against what he's telling them they have to do.
I felt so much shame and guilt. And I still didn't understand that I'd been pimped out.
Some of the red flags to look for when you suspect someone might be sex trafficked. The girl has nice, expensive clothing. She's going out and she's not telling you where she's going. Her grades at school might start to slip, and her world becomes more and more secretive. She talks about having a boyfriend in her life, but she's not going to introduce that guy to the family. My hope for these girls is they reclaim their lives and go after their dreams and have a good life.
I use that video in high schools for grade 11s and 12 students, and it really works. So there's 5 main ways to be trafficked. The most common is what you just watched, the lover boy or Romeo pimp. The second one is a snatch and grab. That's what gangs will use, and we do have a gang problem in Vancouver and in BC. The third is renegade. This is a girl that wants to make money. The fourth is a runaway. Unhappy home, the girl is approached in 24 hours. If she comes down to Vancouver and gets near the downtown east side, it's 2 hours. Or the fifth way is a female friend introduces her to, it's called the game. Note, all 5 ways start differently, but the end result is all the same. The girl is promised a dream, but it's all a lie. If anything is too good to be true, then it's too good to be true. I cannot talk about human trafficking without talking about pornography and how it contributes to make the sex industry very big, very powerful, and very destructive. Pornography is the fuel for the sex industry. It is highly addictive and is called the new crack cocaine. Pornography shows women as objects, and it dehumanizes both men and women. The majority of it today is very violent. The good news is and there is good news, there is a worldwide and growing movement of young people who are seeing porn for what it is, and they're refusing to be involved with it. The message is this: choose real love over porn, because porn harms. So I want to go over my handouts, posters, and books just really quickly. I brought my best books, and I do have a sheet back there that lists all of these. If you want to take a picture of them with your camera, that would be great. But my favorite book is called Invisible Chains, and it's written by Benjamin Perrin, and he's a UBC law professor. He's a good friend of mine. This has all the stats and the research. You can get this at the library. It's no longer in print, unfortunately. When I first started presenting to the police and law enforcement, they would say, give me stats. And this book is just excellent, called Invisible Chains. Now, the good news is there is now a book out on what goes on in Canada with human sex trafficking. Joy Smith, and she's the member of Parliament that brought in our 3 laws. She's written this book called The True Story of Canadian Human Trafficking. If you go to her website, the Joy Smith Foundation, you can order this book. But let me just read the back of it. It kind of summarizes the story. So Abby Summers is a high school student from Ontario with a special love for soccer and dreams of a great future. She receives a message on social media from a new guy named Jake and forms an online friendship. Abby begins to date Jake and falls in love with him quickly, imagining a future together with him. But her hope suffers a bad turn when he convinces her to sell herself to men just for one night. One night turns into many nights, with Jake convincing her to take a trip with him across Canada to make a lot of money for their future life together. She finally wants out. She discovers she's trapped. So one thing I do when I present in high schools, the police have told me to scare the hell out of students. So I tell them if they get into the sex trade, they won't get out. And the likelihood of them getting out is very small. So I say to young people, you don't want to get in the sex trade. Melissa Farley she's the expert in the world, really, prostitution, trafficking, and traumatic stress. So she's connected the dots with pornography, prostitution, trafficking. They're all connected. Don't separate them. Trafficking is for the purpose of prostitution. Prostitution wouldn't exist if we didn't have trafficking. The Americans are really great. They've got a lot of books on this issue. They're 30 years ahead of us in terms of dealing with human sex trafficking. So Linda Smith, she's from Washington State, The Story of America's Prostituted Children. You'd never find a book like that here. But down in the States, they've got the stats, they've got the data, and so you get this kind of material down the States. Did you know where pimping first started? It's kind of interesting. 1996 in Halifax. And this is a law enforcement officer that writes describing how pimping started, and it's called the Toronto Halifax Pimping Ring. And there's quite a famous gang from Halifax, from a certain portion of Halifax. They're here now, and they are generational pimps, and they're guerrilla pimps, actually. They're very dangerous. And so this describes a story, and it's called Somebody's Daughter. Robert Pickton, I always say to law enforcement, you got to know about Pickton. You got to understand the story and why it happened. It should not have happened. And one of the reasons it didn't happen is because VPD and RCMP were not working closely together. The other reason he almost got away is because who was talking to the police? Drug-addicted sex workers, and they weren't believed. But I think that's changed now. I think they are more willing to believe now. Pornland. Dr. Gail Dines is the expert in the world on pornography. Pornography is a problem. And the thing with our devices, especially with our young people, with one click they can access, and I've just learned this, they can even access child pornography. So the stats are at some point, well, it messes up children's brains, developing brain, no surprise, it changes the brain chemistry, but they will act out because they think that's what sex is. That's their sex education, so they act out. And that's, we're seeing more and more child-on-child sexual assault, so that's a problem. Pornography is a huge problem. Green light, red light is a great video, and I just showed you the trailer on that. And then Joy Smith has put out an award-winning documentary, DVD, on human sex trafficking. Children of the Street Society has done a lot of these posters, and I like this. Know the signs of toxic masculinity. We've really got to teach our boys in particular. Don't exploit women. A good man will not hurt or exploit a woman or a girl. And when I'm in high schools, I speak to that. And you know, boys just want to hear that. They want to hear how to be a good man. They don't know how to today in our hypersexualized culture. One poster I really love, this is one of my favorites. It's put up by the RCMP, and they have an I'm Not For Sale campaign. So if anybody wants one of these big posters and want to put it up in a community center or a library or something, please help yourself. I'm Not For Sale. Great poster. I did want to mention the Canadian Centre for the Protection of Children out of Manitoba. Fantastic resource if you know anybody's being bullied online. They're really great. And then there's 3 websites I encourage people to look at. FightTheNewDrug.org. They deal with pornography. The second one is the traffichuman.org, excellent website. It describes what this issue looks like, and blog I have found for protecting children. Online, it gives lots of ideas of how to keep your children safe. So that one's really worth looking up. Let me just read you a poem. Children of the Street Society have helped survivors of the sex trade. Set me free. Caught up in your haze, I'm counting the days until I can leave. I just want to scream, set me free. You slapped my face, then you covered me in lace. I thought it was one time, since the gifts were divine, set me free. The gifts were not free, that I can now see. They come with a price. The price was my life, set me free. 5 years later, and I am not free. Physically, yes, but you're part of me, set me free. So the reason I got into this, or really got into it sort of officially, quite passionately, was Joy Smith had me take care of Christine for 3 days. And Christine, and I did mention this on Sunday, at 11 years of age, her family fell apart, and Dad started to drink. Mom couldn't hold the family together, so all 6 children got put into foster care. Foster dad sexually assaulted her. She's 11 years old, straight A student, played the flute, track star, very talented young girl, but she knew it was wrong. What had happened to her? This is Toronto. She runs. Within 2 hours, she's picked up by an older gentleman who says, I've got lots of girls just like you. And she was servicing men that night for the next 10 years. And she was on cocaine and alcohol starting that night at 11 years of age. So when I heard her story, because she presented to CBC, I'm sitting in the studio bawling my eyes out. Everybody in the studio was wondering what was wrong with me. And we get in the car, the taxi, to go back to our hotel, and I said, Christine, I'm going to stop this in BC. And that's been 7 years ago, and I'm not giving up. And I think we've got Will Eng here, don't we? This is the OIC of the Richmond RCMP detachment. I'm going to ask you to stand up. I want everybody to clap for this man. He didn't have to come tonight, and he also made sure that this is getting videotaped. Education is our greatest weapon, and if people wake up to what's happening, we can really stop it. So that's Christine, but I do want to tell a good news story. And Tegan Marshall, I did show a very short clip again on Sunday. Tegan Marshall, grade 11 from Nanaimo, phones me because he knew what I was doing. He said, Mrs. Peters, I understand you want to stop human sex trafficking. I want to help you stop it. So I mentored him on FaceTime for a whole year. We went over this book, Invisible Chains. We read it together. And then at the end of the year, he had to do a project, and so he presented to Nanaimo City Council. Got a standing ovation. He said it's the best presentation they've ever seen. Now before that, he did present to his youth group, and he presented to a school. Then on his own, he presented to Qualicum City Council. Then the newspaper interviewed him, and then the TV interviewed him and did a whole half-an-hour program on him called World Changers. So he's my hero. The funny thing is, he has cerebral palsy. He's lived his whole life in a wheelchair, and he's helping me stop human sex trafficking. So whenever I tell this story in a high school, all the students are going, oh, I can stop this, I can help. And I got everybody, you know, wanting to help and stop this crime. So that's the good news. Young people, once they learn about this, think it's terrible and they want to stop it. So the reason I do these presentations is to empower you, to encourage you, and to say there's something you can do. The biggest thing you can do, obviously, is write your member of parliament, because they're the ones that decide on the laws that we're going to have and what money is put towards the laws. So the pressure right now that we have is the sex industry here in Vancouver is very powerful, most powerful in the country, and they want Ottawa to fully decriminalize prostitution. Ottawa is listening. They are listening. If you don't write your MP, it's going to happen. If it happens, Canada will change overnight. Okay, we've got a few minutes for questions. I'm hoping there's going to be some questions. Anybody have some questions? Put your hand up. Yes?
Why is it happening so seriously in Vancouver?
It's an entry point into Canada, and it's a port city.
Is there any law to act?
We have the law, and I've got it over there. The federal law is in place. The problem is law enforcement in BC is not enforcing it. Now, why is that happening? The politicians don't believe this is a problem, and so they're not mandating, they're not directing, they're not funding, they're not putting funding aside for training, they're not saying it's a priority. So it's the politicians, we've got to put pressure on the politicians. So I was just at RCMP headquarters, and they said, it's got to be the politicians. The politicians have got to know this is a concern of yours. We have got prostitution rings in our schools. Don't be naive about it. Now why? Because on the internet, they're learning how to do all this stuff. The internet is unregulated, and we have globalization now. So it's a different world than when you and I grew up. Completely different world. So at your age, if I were you, learn everything you can about social media and technology. Arm yourselves so that you can help your children and your grandchildren. And here's a trick. Get your grandchildren to sit down with you and say, teach me about the internet. Show me how to be safe on the internet. And then, and here, for every parent and grandparent in here, your 3 words, I love you. And you do it all the time. I love you. Even if you're mad at them, I love you. I love you. You got to do it, because otherwise pimps do. And they'll take a long time to groom a girl, and they do I love you. It's really simple. It's very basic. Okay, anybody else? Yes?
Are there any stats available that how girls get sucked into that come from Christian homes versus non-Christian homes?
Oh, that's a very good question. Do you know the BC Light magazine? I think Pastor Steph quoted from it. Dr. Jack Taylor did a whole series on human sex trafficking, and his line that is becoming more common in Christian homes as well. I'll be honest with you, buyers of sex want clean-looking girls. They want girls that are easy to manipulate and are disease-free. But they want pretty-looking girls, clean-looking girls. So yeah, girls from Christian homes are going to be just as vulnerable. Absolutely. Here's the protective factor. If a girl has a loving father and gets through grade 12, that's going to be sort of a protective factor. It's not likely she'll get into the sex trade. Dads are key, and I talked about that on Sunday. But getting through grade 12 is huge. Well, because then the numbers just drop off, right off, that they're far less likely to get in the sex trade. If they don't finish grade 12, they're very vulnerable. And here, it is one caring, consistent adult in a child's life will make the difference. Okay, anybody else? Question, yes?
Is the Me Too movement doing any good to stand the tide?
Yes, in the States. The Me Too movement, yeah, but you know what, people are starting to forget about it now. You know, when I present in schools, some have heard, like the grade 8s, 9s haven't heard of it. The grade 10s, 11s, and 12s, maybe. University students have heard of it, but the high school students haven't. So, but I would say more in the States, not so much up here. Anybody else? Yes?
Concerning the parents, what power or control, or what can they do if they find that their children have become involved in the sex trade? Like thinking of Amy up there, her grades dropped off, she was working 12 hours a day. Surely her parents would, or her family would have noticed that. What can they do to stop it, get her out, help?
That's a great question. That's why I hope you'll take my sheet up here on child sex trafficking. It tells you where the resources are, but you're going to report it. And this is my line to everybody, you've got to report it to the police. Go to the police. They are your best friends. You've got to report it. So start there. And then phone that National Human Trafficking Hotline number, and they will walk you through the steps, what to do. Get help. Don't hide it. You've got to talk about it. You've got to deal with it. Your children have got to know you're there for them, okay? Regardless of what they do, you are there for them. You know, and I've often said to parents, it's really tempting, especially when they're teenagers, you want to say, get out of the house, leave. Never, ever, ever say that, even if you're tempted. Most important 3 words, I love you. Stay there. Doesn't mean you spoil them, doesn't mean they get away with stuff, but I love you. Okay, anybody else? Yes?
Not so much a question, but you can speak to it if you want. I think it's so important that you're bringing this up just to get us comfortable talking about this topic. Because ironically, in a sex-saturated culture, parents and grandparents are still too embarrassed to talk about sex with their kids.
Yep.
So it's hard to address that issue when we're too embarrassed to talk about it.
I've got parenting stuff back there. There's lots of help out there. Protect Young Minds. Go to that website. I suggested it. And you'll get lots of suggestions. You have to have the conversations. And actually, the younger, the better. And you've got to talk about pornography because they're going to see it. The number of parents that I meet that go, my child would never. And I go, oh no, they're the dangerous ones. Yes, your child could, and your child probably will. One RCMP officer said to me, Cathy, any person can turn into a monster. Now, fortunately, I pushed back, and I said, any person can turn into a saint. So, either way though, don't think your children can't do stuff. It can be just being with the wrong person at the wrong time, making one bad decision. That's all it takes. Are you there? Are you there? Are you having the conversation? Yeah, it's messy, it's tricky, it's tough, it's hard, it's painful, it's heartbreaking. But as parents, you are the main influencer in your children's lives. You're it. Hi.
Not really a question, but again, just a comment. It seems there's a lot of pressure on parents to do the right thing for their kid to not get involved, but you know, there's a lot of parents that have a lot of pressures of their own, that are distracted with other things, and so I think it's really key as people in the community to be aware of those families and to, you know, your kids' friends or...
Absolutely.
It's probably crucial for educators and people that are dealing with these kids every day to have this information.
Absolutely.
You know, it's one thing to say, oh, those parents, they should take care of their kids, but sometimes they can't.
Yeah.
They have their own trauma or their own situation. Yeah. So, you know, it's one thing that you can't really divide it. Like, we're still responsible for all those other kids.
Absolutely.
Just to be a safe place for them to know they can come talk to you about anything without judgment or, you know, just to be a friendly person.
So one of my favorite handouts back there, by the way, is how predators groom, and make sure you get that page. But one thing I say to parents is, you have to say to your children, you can tell me anything. Now, I warn you, you will be freaked out. I was freaked out, and I had to learn not to be freaked out. But you have to tell your children they can talk about anything with you. Have to. They have to know that you're safe. You're it. And I like what you brought out. I mean, we are part of a whole community. Richmond, I mean, I love the Lower Mainland. I've grown up here, but I don't like the direction many of these communities are going. So let's reclaim, let's get our communities back. Let's bring these things out in the open. Let's be proactive. Let's stop it. Let's draw the line in the sand and say no more. We're not having this. Did you know you can make a difference? One person can make the difference. Tegan Marshall, my handicapped friend, is making a difference on Vancouver Island.